there's several issues I wish to address. One is feminism and what I think that the opposition view may be referring to. My view on feminism as quote unquote not being fair. Also, the Nazi documentary on the History Channel that I saw on Janine's channel. I've probably seen it before, but I don't really remember it that well. I probably have seen it several years back. Maybe 5, 6 years. I don't know. Yeah, those are the things I want to talk about. Okay, so first of all, when I say that not everybody who is in a group of people is a bad person or sees things the same way as the rest of the group. Okay, so when I'm talking about feminists, I'm talking about mainstream feminism. I'm talking about what those people who see it that way think, and also I caution those who call themselves something who don't agree with the rest of the group. I would caution them and say, hey, you know what, that is not a good idea. Unless your argument is that third wave feminism is different from the foundational feminism or women's suffrage or whatever you wish to call it, then you're pretty much putting yourself in that category in a way that you don't have to. It's different than being part of a racial group or an ethnic group. It's a political group that you have put yourself in. You then can't turn around and say, well, just because 99% of them see it this way doesn't mean we're all bad, and you should stop using that word to say that these people are bad. You see what I'm saying? So anyway, Roe versus Wade, 1973. Homosexuality was removed as a mental disorder, I think late 1973 or early 1974. Either way, the timeline shows you that these people work together. They've been working together for quite some time. And if you know a lot about the movements of the 60s, and you know more than it was just about civil rights and how women and homosexuals attached themselves to civil rights, and how the Panthers included women and homosexuals in their ideas of standing up to the people in charge. And this is still pervasive today, where you see quote unquote black civil rights activists, former Panthers, gay rights activists, feminist activists teamed up together against the white establishment, if you will, or the conservative establishment, or whatever you would like to refer to it as. Okay? So, I've seen genuine progress with groups that I think that should not have made progress. They have achieved results, we'll say. I wouldn't call it progress because I think it is counterproductive when it comes to human progress. Okay, so pro-choice. This is a huge issue with feminists, a huge issue. The huge issues with black people have never truly been addressed. Probably the biggest issue with feminists, being pro-choice, went in their favor. The biggest issues with gays, worked in their favor. Gay marriage, So we see this alliance, and we see things, the timeline line up to confirm that alliance, for those of you who do not know. I think that people who do not see that there's an alliance with the mainstream movement of feminism and the mainstream gay right movements, they just don't know anything about politics. I really don't feel like I need to explore that anymore. So anyway, the abortion issue. All right, feminists are either openly eugenicists or they are unwittingly eugenicists. My mom, for example, whenever we talk about eugenics, she tries to move away from the racial issue and talk about horses and stuff. And she's trying to slowly try to introduce the idea that same concept can be or should be applied to people to a certain extent. And my older brother, they agree about a lot of liberal issues, except for that word. It doesn't sit well with my older brother. He automatically associates it with race, and he's actually right to not like that word. It is a very disgusting practice done by inferior minds You know, for someone to come to the conclusion that they should do that in the first place, automatically inferior. You know, that's like someone coming to the conclusion that they should be a pedophile and thinking that they know better than everyone else and they should manipulate things behind the scenes. And there are people like that, you know, to make it so that they can do it. But anyway, so these are inferior minds. I've established that quite thoroughly, quite easily, quite succinctly, concisely. Now, what you see since 1973 is there was a rise in abortions and then it kind of leveled out. And we have about 43 million abortions a year, which means that 2/3 of preventable deaths that I have reported on, that I included in my study, were abortions. So the major cause of preventable deaths is something that feminists have allowed for. Now they could make and listen to the argument, and I'm going to shoot this argument down, I'm going to end this video. The argument that they will try to make, or that they have made, or that they could make, which is weak at best, is that, well, just because we want women to have the choice of whether or not to have abortions doesn't mean we think they should have it. Then where is the huge outcry against abortion? You know, where is the feminist saying, well, we want women to have the rights, but we don't want them to do it? You just don't see that. You just don't see that. And the statistics line up with the fact that you don't see that. 43 million abortions a year, and you don't want women to have abortions? You just want them to have the choice? Well, one of two things. Either you're fucking lying if you make that argument, or whatever you're doing is not enough. And you need to take a step back and say, hey, we're wrong. We cannot stop women from doing the wrong thing as a result of what we've been pushing for all these years. And what we've been fighting to maintain all these years since 1973. What was that? You know, that's 27 plus 16. 43? 43 years? So for the last 43 years, you have been fighting to maintain that number just doesn't sit well with me, because it's 43 million a year. You know, that's one hell of a coincidence, right? 43 million people a year, and it's been 43 years. You know, it's kind of, you know, that's why I didn't believe when I first did the calculation. I'm like, 43? Am I confusing that with how many million people die a fucking year? You know, this is fucking insane, right? Whatever, some things in life are just coincidences. All right, so, you know, yeah. You need to take a step back and say, we're wrong. We haven't stopped wrong. We haven't made the world a better place as a result of this. We've caused a whole lot of abortions to take place. And, you know, there's some number of people, I don't know what it is, but some percent of people regret those abortions. And the rest should, unless the abortion saved the mother's life or something, unless there was a very logical, non-eugenic reason for the abortion, you know. We've caused this holocaust on babies, you know. And we're a bunch of cowards who can't see the difference between, you know, a baby that's, you know, 3 months away from being born and a baby that's born. I mean, we can't see that there's not much of a difference between a baby that's 3 months from being born and a baby that's born. Or even a baby that's 6 months or 9 months, you know. As soon as the woman starts to become pregnant, now we have a sacred process. You know, this impregnant. She's been made pregnant. She's impregnated. You know, she's made pregnant, and so now something is in the process of being created in a sacred manner. And we have destroyed that process. That's what they should have said to themselves. So yes, feminists are spiritual bottom feeders. And if you look at it from the angle of preventable deaths, They are among the worst spiritual bottom feeders. I don't regret for 1 second putting them on the list. Perhaps I regret not putting them higher up on the list. But then there's the LGBT people who usually are feminists as well. You know, so they're basically feminists who are also gay. So yes, they do belong above that. And then the worst criminals and Satanists, yes, they do belong. You know, they're probably pretty much right on the list. But the list is kind of misleading, you know, in a way, because it makes you seem like, well, they're only number 4. You know, they're number 4 out of every group in the fucking world. You know, the fucking Holocaust motherfuckers, you know? And, you know, it never ceases to amaze me to see the hypocrisy of Jews in politics. The ones who are pro-Israel, which means pro-oppression of Palestine, who, you know, are the financiers who could prevent a lot of the preventable deaths. And there's, you know, 10 times plus, you know, of the Holocaust every year in preventable deaths. And how they support, you know, you have a lot of Jews in the Liberal Party that support, who are secular humanists, atheist Jews, you know, like Soros and them, who support the fucking Holocaust of babies. You know, it is just madness. But I guess it makes a certain amount of sense because, oh, the other issue I forgot to touch on is that in the Nazi documentary, the part that they left out is that the Jews were caught funding the American Nazi Party because America had an isolationist policies or were neutral during the war, and they wanted to bring America into the war. The same reason they funded the German party early on and had the Havana Agreement, because they wanted Jews to go to Israel. Okay, they wanted this war. They wanted anti-Semitism to rise, problem solution, America to solve it, and when the smoke cleared, they would have some grievances that they could cry about all the time, and they would move their people to Israel, while downplaying the Holocaust in Africa and the Holocaust with babies. I mean, no matter how you slice it, you know, I would love to see the Jewish answer to that. You know, they pretty much can't answer that without saying that their lives are more important than black people's. We see how they treated the Ethiopians there. We see how they treat the African immigrants there. They cannot answer the charges against them without saying that our lives are more important, or that we should be concerned with Jews first and foremost, far before anything else. Not even before, but far before. Okay? And that is my problem with 99% of Jews in politics. If they just don't want to take responsibility for what they've done, the Holocaust every year that they've contributed to, that they've funded, and that they're playing stupid about. It's the same thing with the whites in politics and anyone else who's rich, who's in a position of power, who's very influential in politics, who is allowing this to happen. No excuse whatsoever. Complete hypocrisy. You know, and so, you know, again, feminists will say, well, we know how you feel about racism and the white power structure and this and that. They could also say, well, we know how you feel about pizza, fucking ice cream, and, I don't know, cartoons or something. Movies. Okay? You see it my way on some things, but you're still fucking mass murdering eugenicist scum, you know? So there's a lot of group of people who can say, we know how you feel about this, that, and the other thing. But at the end of the day, my point of view is superior. I'm selfless, and they're a complex-having, selfish motherfucker. Thank you. Just as you see with Zionists and anti-Zionist Jews, and you saw with the Stern Gang and the terrorists when Israel was under British control and it was still Palestine. Some Jews didn't agree with other Jews, and had those terrorists included all Jews in the conspiracy, you know, and tried to include them and try to inform them, you know, that it wouldn't have worked. Some of them would have a crisis of conscience, a moral crisis, and they would have told the British, you know. It's the same thing with the Nazi Party. There was the Jewish veterans, you know, Jewish war veterans, I think the Jewish Defense League, I'm not sure about the second one, but some kind of war veterans, Jewish war veterans. They fought against, you know, in fisticuffs and little scuffles against the Nazi Party. Obviously, they didn't see eye to eye with the Jews who were funding the Nazi Party. And I'm not saying the American Nazi Party, I'm not saying that they had, with Kuhn and them, um, or Cohn, I'm not saying that they got all their money from the Jews, but I'm saying that they were funded heavily by them. And, that probably had something to do with the different leaderships, leadership struggles that they had as well. So it was the same thing with the Havre Agreement. It's the same thing with funding the Nazi Party. It's the same thing with the Holocaust. This plan that the Zionists and secret society Jews and atheist Jews had, they couldn't share with all Jews. Now, some of you will say, well, why would atheist Jews go along with Zionist Jews? You don't know too much about, the Great Conspiracy and why it's real if you have to ask that question, but I'll explain it to you. Atheists are people who team up with people when they feel it's in their best interests. Okay? For them to get, their own Jewish land where they can mix with Jews who only date Jews, and have a strong pro-Jewish sentiment and everyone feels good, and for them to be in a secret society with some of the richest people on the planet is what is called in their best fucking interest. I don't think I have to explain that to you, So the reason why there's atheists doing this is because they're controlling the movements. They're trying to break down Gentile governments and societies so they can extort them, exploit them. It's trying to, throw off their focus so they can be more suggestible to Zionist propaganda. So, that is that. So I'm going to tell you like this, Hitler and the Nazis were right about several things. They were right that there was an inordinate influence on global economies by Jews. The Jews were international financiers, that they were disproportionately to blame for the Treaty of Versailles when it came to certain economic sanctions and things of this nature. They were right that you could describe it as Zog, a Zionist occupation government. Now, this is some sort of a banker occupation which is disproportionately, Jewish. And the Jews aren't even that many, there's not that many of them in the world. So it forces one to the logical conclusion that there's manipulation going on here, there's favoritism going on here. When people have a lot of money and they can get the best tutors and schools for their children, and they have a culture that stresses education, that they will logically do better. If they didn't do better, then they would be inferior. We're all humans, we're all about the same intelligence on average, regardless of race or ethnicity. So when one group, has better schools and has a culture that promotes education more while they're attacking other people's cultures to keep them from feeling empowered, from feeling smart enough to succeed, they're taken away from their ambition and their drive and their desire to do great, and making them feel hopeless and inferior and ignorant and stupid, and turn to sports instead of academics and gangs and so on and so forth. And if the Jews and the whites and the Asians didn't do the best, then they would be horribly, horribly inferior. That's like we're in a race. We're in a mile race, and I start off a half mile ahead. Me and everyone who's my race. And then I say, well, we're superior. That's why we won the race. We're superior. And this is absolutely a valid comparison. We're superior. If we didn't win the fucking race, we would be fucking dramatically inferior. I mean, come on. Common sense, right? No brainer, no brainer. But as soon as you try to apply that same in-your-face, obvious logic to what is going on in society and sociology, a lot of people, they turn stupid. But, let me guess, the white man's always keeping you down. These are the same people who would have probably told blacks who weren't allowed to read, the reason why you're stupid is you're black. Not because you're a slave who's not allowed to fucking read, but because you're black, you're inferior. And in fact, their predecessors did make that argument. This is nothing but the evolution of that same ignorant argument. It's like the evolution of psychiatry is an oppressive force. The evolution of Eurocentric philosophy as an oppressive force. And the white denial that goes along with it. No skinhead. I've talked to a lot of these more educated and more well-researched skinheads. They have a lot of history, a lot of facts that proves their point about a Jewish conspiracy. And some things they're a little bit off about, but overall it does prove their point that Jews have an inordinate influence over politics, social policy, culture, and what have you. Okay, mainstream culture, and controlled opposition. But as soon as you go to that racial superiority issue, they have no argument whatsoever. It's just full of holes. They only point to things that they don't think about the key factors, the determinants, the determining factors. They just say, they put on the blinders and say, it's the same thing they do when they look at how whites have contributed to the New World Order agenda. They put on the blinders and say, Jew, 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 Jew. You know, one of the more honest white racists I've come across has said that he doesn't think that blacks are inferior. He just wants people to be separate, and that the whites are the managerial class of the New World Order. Thus, he's at least conceding that they play a part. I don't entirely agree. I believe that there's whites even on the top level when you look at the royal families. Unless the royal family is really Jewish and they're not from the House of Wessex and Anglo-Saxon and all this other stuff, you know, then, and even if they are, they're at least part white. So there's people who are at least part European on record as some of the highest places in the conspiracy, you know. So yeah, so again, going back to the race issue, they put the blinders on. Forget slavery, forget the Jim Crow laws. We invented all this stuff for the last, you know, certain period of time. You know, it's absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Forget the foundation of mathematics, science, you know, etc. We did all this for this certain period of time. Forget alchemy, which started European technology off in the first place. Without alchemy and chemistry, what science would have Europeans really have done? You know, without mathematics and chemistry and alchemy, what would they really have accomplished? They would have been nomadic, barbaric, animalistic white folks running around the mountains in Europe. You know, cave-dwelling folk. And I don't mean any offense, but let's look at the facts here. You know, it's not enough to say, well, we won the race. You know, you have to look at, well, you started fucking 2 minutes ahead. You know, you can't completely ignore that. For the same reason, you can't say, well, we invented all this stuff. Well, you suppressed all these people for fucking 400 fucking years. And your inventions before that were for the most part mediocre. And many of them were taken from other peoples and you took the credit for it. How can you downplay that? Once you remove the things that have given you the advantage, you're looking at a fairly level playing field for the last 2,000 years as far as inventions and academic achievements. Once you remove what gave you the upper hand, you know, it's not so impressive. Once you consider what gave you the upper hand, your inventions aren't so ingenious. Pretty straight fucking forward, okay? I'm not saying white people are fucking stupid. I'm saying that their argument is fucking stupid when it comes to racial superiority or racial supremacy, you know. And then there's the more obvious arguments. Look at Africans who come here and become brain surgeons. They become rocket scientists. They become some of the top software engineers and things of this nature. You know, if white people are on average superior, how come black Africans on average come to this country with, you know, the same social pressures and disadvantages that African Americans have and start blowing away the average white people? What's your explanation for that? You really have no explanation for that. There is no natural white supremacy. There is an artificial white supremacy. There is a white supremacy by design by white people. It's the same thing with the Jews and the Asians. Asians work hard. You know, they make the argument, it's so stupid. They always compare themselves to African Americans. They say, well, Asians come here, they work hard, they get these good jobs, and so on and so forth. Okay? These are the most ambitious Asians who come across on boats, determined to make it, compared to the most oppressed people, okay, who are the most targeted people. Cops don't say, I'm looking for an Asian to fucking pull over and search. Okay, hip-hop doesn't appeal to fucking Asians. Some Asians, you know, accept hip-hop. There are Asian rappers like that guy Jin and some other guy, right? But they're not the main targets of this detrimental force that you see in the news. Gangster movies, hip-hop, you know, drugs in the black communities, not in the Asian communities. They drop the drugs in the black communities with black people in mind, giving them to black drug dealers like Freeway Ricky Ross. And these cowards get in the news as if they know better than people like me and say, well, I mean, just complete bootlickers. Of course you do better. You started a half a mile ahead. I'm gonna end it there.